Looks like the list is slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rachel with Plano Public Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us for today's program. Please note that if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Sabrina will be monitoring the chat to assist you with any issues and bring questions to the presenter's attention. Note that you are muted, so that's why we suggest you use the chat. And this program will be recorded and up on the Plano Public Library YouTube channel for later viewing in case you have forgotten something that Erin mentions and want to reference it again. We will have that ready for you. And I will now present Erin. When asked what she does for a living, Erin Hoffer quips that she gets paid to play in the dirt with worms and encourage others to do the same as often as possible. She is delighted to combine her love of gardening and her love of education into a full-time vocation as an environmental educator and a part-time advocate as a avocation as a master gardener and master composter volunteer. Welcome, Erin Hoffer.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me back today, especially after we had so much rain. I'm sure a lot of folks are just anxious to get out into the garden and start gardening again. All right, so today we're going to be talking about birds, and what I want to tell you is don't wing it, plan it. When it comes to lifestyle choices and landscaping choices that are bird friendly. So I'm curious to know, there's a lot of you on the call today, why do you love birds? Click in the, I believe you all call it the chat box in this platform. Some do call it the question box, but tell me, why do you love birds? Sabrina, why do you love birds?
Part of the reason, honestly, is because my cat loves birds.
Oh,
so
how
we
fun.
watch them together for different reasons, I'm sure.
I'm sure. So I'm seeing some great things, like they're like my pets, but they're free. That's great. And some folks are loving their color and their sound and their song and their intelligence. That is a wonderful observation. Birds really are intelligent. So sometimes we love them for the fact that they have musical voices, like this mourning dove. She has such a distinctive call, and we can learn to identify birds even when we can't see them from their calls, because they are so distinctive. Sometimes we love them for their seasonal visits, and I don't know about you all, but there is no greater harbinger of spring's arrival than a robin hopping around in your yard. I know that spring is here when I start to see the robins show up, and they have been hanging around our environmental education center now for a couple of weeks. Sometimes we like them for their entertainment value. They are quite comical and they're quite smart. And sometimes watching them try to crack open a nut or solve a problem it can be quite amusing. Sometimes we love them for their vast range of songs. And so some of the birds, like the northern mockingbird, have quite a repertoire. And I have to admit, while he's not much to look at, he is definitely something to listen to. And they show up in our environmental education um, building quite often. And it is because we have some great plants to attract them. A lot of folks mentioned that they love them for their color, their bright, beautiful plumage. And the cardinal here looks like he's been having a bit of a day. His feathers are indeed ruffled. So, whatever your reason is that you love birds, if you love them, care for them and start to care for them now. Don't wait until they're gone. We know that in the last 50 years, bird populations have definitely declined. 1 in 4 birds have disappeared, and some species have had their populations reduced even more drastically. We've lost about 2.5 billion migratory birds in a 50-year period. And the Baltimore Oriole didn't have like a 25% drop in its population. It has lost about 40%. And that is a serious problem for us and for the birds. So the question then becomes, why is this happening? Well, a lot of it has to do with us. All along the migratory path, we're replacing wildlife habitat with our habitat. And we don't always take the opportunity when we remove shelter and food sources uh, to replace them with those after we've built our homes and we've built out our cities and our towns and our suburbs. But we do have that opportunity. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can restore that habitat. We're also going to talk about some ways that we can make some very simple lifestyle changes that will support the birds and will support bird habitat. The good news is that you can help. You can help by making bird friendly choices in your landscape and in your lifestyle. So you don't have to be a gardener. You don't have to be a landscape designer. You don't even have to have a garden to help birds. You just need a kind heart and a willingness to adopt some new habits. So, one thing that can help is to change our perspective. They're not just our birds. We think of them as our birds because they come back year after year. But what we often forget is those songbirds that spend the spring and the summer and into the early fall with us, that come and reproduce and raise their young with us here in North America, they migrate and they spend the year much, much further south. And those two habitats, the one in the north part of the planet and the one in the south part of the planet, and all of the places in between along that migratory path, it's all connected. And so it does matter what we do here because it affects what happens there as well. When they migrate a very, very long distance. And if you look carefully at the colored lines, you can see how far north and south. We're talking tens of thousands of miles for some of those birds. And some of them are going east to west from the south part of Africa all the way up into China and um, farther over onto that part of the planet. And in order to do that, they have to have energy. The way they store that energy is as fat so that they can make that long migration. Now, they do have to stop and refuel along the way, but with habitat disappearing, that's becoming more and more of a challenge. So, store that fat, they have to have a high quality habitat that provides not only the shelter, but the food sources for them to accumulate the fat and put that into their storage tank. An example of a high quality habitat is a shade coffee plantation. Now, shade coffee plantations looks kind of like a little bit like a rainforest here. It's got multiple layers. It has the understory trees, it has the canopy or overstory trees, it has a lot of ground cover. The shade coffee plantations provide good foraging habit for our bird friends, and not only for the migratory birds, but for the ones that are resident in that part of the planet. In that habitat are insects and fruit and nectar that allow birds to build the body fat so that they can travel those long migration distances. Unfortunately, not all plantations are shade-grown coffee plantations. That was what they originally started as, but now there are farmers all along the migratory path that have made changes in their plantations, and it's having a profound impact on the bird population. Many of them have been converted to sun coffee plantations. And you would think, well, okay, and well, that means that it's driven by an economic decision. They remove the trees in order to let the sun in so that they can plant a different type of coffee, the Robusta bean, as opposed to the Arabica. The Arabica grows in the shade. The Robusta grows in the sun, and it matures more quickly. It has a higher yield for the farmer, but it also produces a poorer quality of coffee, and it has a poorer habitat for the area. So when the farmers remove the trees, they also remove the services. Uh, had there been trees or when there were trees there, they help to prevent erosion. Their roots help to keep the soil in place, even on a steep slope. That means that they're also helping to prevent landslides and keeping the land from sliding into the water, which then creates water pollution problems. When trees are there, they're putting nutrients into the farm. When trees are gone, that's not happening. When trees are present, they're storing carbon. When they're gone, they can't do that anymore. And in addition, they provide that essential habitat. And you're thinking, well, that's really sad, but what does that have to do with me? Like, why does it matter? I can't grow coffee in Texas to replace that habitat. And you're absolutely right. You can't grow coffee. But you can make a choice to drink shade grown coffees so that when you make a coffee purchase, you're conscious of selecting something that supports a farmer elsewhere on the globe that grows in a shade grown environment. Shade grown coffees are delicious. They're a much higher quality bean. They're economically beneficial to the farmers. And most important part for us as bird lovers is that it helps to support more than 42 species of North American songbirds. So while we can't plant a habitat, we can support people who have that habitat so that they can keep the habitat for the birds. And then also we get delicious coffee. We've talked for a moment about habitats. Locally, we can, however, do things like reducing lawn and using native plants instead. We love our lawns. They're green, they're cool, they help to mitigate the heat in our environment. The United States has 63 million acres of lawn. That is a lot of green, but it doesn't support wildlife like native plants do. So I'm not suggesting you take out all of the lawn, but I am suggesting that you reduce the lawn. Use less water. You'll use less time and energy taking care of the lawn. You'll add beauty and habitat to your landscape if you will use native plants instead. And so this is a great native plant. This is a Turks Cap. It's a Texas native. This happens to be the original red variety, and hummingbirds love it. One of the reasons I love it, aside from the fact that it's so easy to grow, is that it does well both in shade and in sunshine. So this is a wonderful plant to add to your garden. And we actually have some resources at the end. We'll talk a little bit about other types of plants that you can add. And I've provided some links for you. Now, you don't actually have to have a garden. I did say that a little bit earlier. You can have a small container garden, and every little space helps. When you plant small containers and put them out, or when you create a small plot of bird-friendly plants in your yard, you're helping the birds year round because you're attracting insects, and those insects provide important protein. Now, a lot of times we think about seeds, and I think the reason we think about seeds is because often we put them out in our bird feeders, and we think that that's the only thing that birds eat. But the reality is that insects are really important to birds because their young don't eat insects. Their young eat insects, they don't eat seeds. So every little bit helps, even something as small as a couple of pots of pollinator attractors. Every plant in your garden is important. Goldfinches, like our sweet friend here, love seeds like coneflower. And coneflower is definitely something that does well here. And it comes in a lot of different varieties. The original is the purple, but they have white and orange. So there's something that you can grow in whatever color palette you have in your yard. Coneflowers will do well in the sun and even in partial shade. And as the season moves forward and the pods begin to form, the seed pods, you will see a lot of your bird friends showing up to have a snack. Now, often we think of feeding our birds in this way. But what I want you to change in the way you think about feeding birds is that every plant in your yard is a bird feeder, or it can be a bird feeder. And you have to think of it in terms of it either has food or it doesn't have food for your bird friends. So if you want to feed everyone or all of your bird friends, this is one option, and it does have an unfortunate effect. That is that birds are not very tidy eaters. They tend to throw things, and you end up with a lot of seed around a feeder. It gets wet, it sprouts, it attracts vermin, and it can be a bit of a mess. The other thing that we don't think about is wild birds actually like to forage for their food. So when we're providing them food, especially if we're doing it in a season where there may be lots of natural food, this may be not your best choice. And so instead, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you begin to discover which birds you want to attract and which plants specifically attract them. So instead of this kind of a bird feeder, we would love for you to plant native plants like sunflowers. Goldfinches love sunflowers. And each flower ripens slowly, and you'll have more than one flower. That means you're going to have more than one feeder. You can have lots of friends stopping by and picking up a snack. Seeds are great because they are full of protein and high quality oil, calories for the birds that help with putting on fat. Another way that you can support native birds and native plants is thinking about how native plants provide not only habitat for the birds themselves, but also for the insects that nourish them. Baby birds eat larvae. So here we've got a chickadee, and the chickadee is ready to feed its offspring. The interesting thing about chickadees is that recently Audubon and Cornell's bird lab did a study on chickadees. And what they discovered is that chickadees can only sustain their population if at least 70% of the plants that are in the habitat are native plants. And that's even a higher percentage than 70% that's required by other birds. And it makes sense because the two developed alongside of each other. So if you have native plants, you have the insects that go with them and help pollinate. If you have the insects, then the birds come along and are part of that habitat. So let's talk a little bit about what are the perfect plants for a bird buffet. Well, obviously pollinators. Any kind of plant that is attracting a pollinator and attracts butterflies and wasps and bees and all kinds of flying insects, that is a good choice. Yet we don't like to think about our butterflies as being part of the buffet, but they are. And here you see a salvia. I'm pretty sure it's a Henry Dewelberg salvia, very common here. It might also just be a mealy cup sage salvia, but our eastern black swallowtail loves the nectar. So while the birds can't drink the nectar, their food source will. So making sure that you have plants that are nectar sources for insects will help to make the birds be more abundant in your yard. And I think it's a double bonus because not only do you get the beautiful flowers, but you get the beautiful insects that come along with it, and then eventually you get the birds. We don't like to think of our migrating monarchs as being part of the bird buffet, but they are to a certain extent. And that means if you want monarchs, you've got to plant milkweed. While there are many, many different types of nectar sources, and the milkweed itself is a nectar source for the monarch, the mother monarch has to have a place to lay her eggs that is perfect for the eggs when they hatch, for the larva. And the only plant that the larva will eat is milkweed. So the mama monarch has to have milkweed both for her babies and for herself. So you can put that out and have a lot more monarchs and maybe a few that end up with your bird friends. Think also about seeds. Seeds provide that protein, and seeds will often last long into the winter for our bird friends. So, in addition to the coneflower and the sunflower that I mentioned earlier, black-eyed Susan is a really good choice. It does really well here. We have several varieties. They even come, some hybrids come in different colors there's one called Sombrero, it's kind of an orange color. But Coreopsis, or some of you may know it as tick seed, is another really good, easy to grow plant that eventually provides seeds to our bird friends. Autumn sedum joy, that's also known as stone crop, has a flat landing pad for our insect friends, but it also eventually develops some seeds for our bird friends later into the fall. So these lovely pale pinks will become more of a burgundy color, and eventually they'll turn almost a rust color, and that's about the time they start putting out seed for the birds, and that's usually kind of late into the fall when a lot of other food sources are gone. And believe it or not, even marigolds are enjoyed by the birds. Eventually, the marigolds will make their very tiny seeds, and some of our smaller birds love to crack them open. But even when they are in flower shape, we have birds that will just rip into the flower itself. So, marigolds, I think even kindergartners can grow marigolds, and a pot of marigolds is a really simple way to help out the birds and the insects that are in your yard. Another plant is a plant that has fruit, and this is an American beautyberry. This is the original beautyberry that's got the very bright fuchsia berries on it. It will eventually drop its leaves, so some of the shelter goes away. But as long as you don't cut down the bare branches, those seeds will stay for a very long time, or rather, that fruit will stay for a very long time. Now, birds aren't going to be the only ones eating it. We've seen some of our squirrel friends and some of our mice friends help themselves as well. But it's a lot of fun to watch the birds perching on the long branch, trying to get at the fruit. And another plant that does really well here is a Yaupon Holly. Now, when we talk about Yaupon Holly, we're actually talking about the tree. There is a plant called the dwarf Yaupon Holly that is related to it, but it comes as a mounding shrub. And as far as I can recall, it is sterile. There aren't any berries on it. But on the tree itself, as long as you have a female Yaupon Holly, you have lots of lovely berries that will last throughout the winter. We have them out on our Yaupon Hollies. We have 2 females and 1 male. It's really important if you are putting in a Yaupon Holly and you want to attract birds that you select it, if at all possible, when it's bearing berries so that you know that you're going to have that. But we have 2 of them, and I will tell you, right up until spring, until recently, we still had fruit on the trees. Another evergreen that does well here and is really popular with our songbirds is the leatherleaf mahonia. You may also know it as Oregon grape holly. And you can see that these berries look just like clusters of grapes. It's a small bush. It prefers shade. So for those of you who have a shade area and you're looking for something that will grow, the deeper the shade, the happier the leatherleaf mahonia is. It's not real fond of even partial shade. We've had to move one because we lost tree canopy. But even in that shade area, it has the ability to develop the um, the grapes or the fruits that are so popular with the birds, and they develop them earlier in the year because it puts out its beautiful yellow blossoms way into the wintertime. So kind of, this year it seems like it was in January. Usually it's kind of the beginning of February. And then as we get into the late spring, we start seeing the fruits developing. Another category is to look for plants that have nectar. And here is a lovely hummingbird friend sipping from a dahlia. And dahlias do just fine here, and they're great as potted plants, but you can also put them in the garden. Another one I mentioned was the Turks Cap. And I loved this photo because now you can see exactly how the hummingbird gets into that little Turks Cap. It kind of pokes its nose in and opens the flaps up. Often people ask me, do they sip out of the straw at the top? No, that's not a straw. that, that is for pollination. And you can see where that little bird is bumping its head up against I think it's called the anther, and picking up pollen, and then it'll go on to another Turk's cap, and it will spread that pollen. But uh, do do think about Turk's cap as a possibility. And then something as even as easy as a zinnia. And zinnias are marvelous because they come in so many different colors. Our insect friends love them. Butterflies love them especially because they have a flat landing pad. But our hummingbird friends enjoy them as well. So as long as
Oh,
you're
Erin?
providing, yes.
Oh, sorry. There was one question about specific plants. So they said we have a lot of cannas and wandering Jew, purple and green. Do those work for birds as well?
I don't know about the wandering Jew, but I believe, yes, the canis will attract hummingbirds. Kind of a general rule of thumb is um, if it's red and it's somewhat tubular, it will attract hummingbirds. But a lot of insects like things that are red as well. And so if you've got canas, then they are attracting insects, and if you've got insects, then you've got birds. So yes, many of the plants will do. And we had cannas for a very long time at the Plano Community Garden. I don't remember ever seeing birds in around them, but I know we had lots of birds there. But I do remember seeing them with lots of insects around them. Were there any other questions that were pending?
That was the only one so far.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking that. So, as long as we're talking about providing plants, you also need to provide fresh water. And I will tell you that something that I learned last year when we were doing our All About Birds virtual fair for the months of April, May, June, I think. Um, I learned about the importance of fresh water. Now, when I was a child, my grandmother had bird feeders, lots of plants, and bird baths right outside the dining room window. And when I visited, I can remember helping to fill that every day with fresh water. Well, I learned last year that birds actually kind of have a preference for how they want their bird bath to be. So, if you don't have a bird bath and you would like to provide fresh water, then some things to keep in mind are that wide and shallow is a good thing. In fact, they would prefer it. They don't want it very deep. They're perfectly capable of flapping their wings and splashing it up on themselves. They want it to be shallow for that reason, but they also want it to be shallow so that they can drink easily. They want it to have some perching stones if possible. The bottom surface needs to be a bit rough so that they have sure footing. I don't know when the last time was that you walked around a pool, but we always have rough surfaces around the edges of our pool and often on the steps getting down into the pool, but farther into the deeper areas, they're kind of slick. And that rough area helps us keep our footing. Well, that rough area also helps birds to keep their footing in there. And I would say that the other thing that is really, really important is change your water. If you can't change it every day, change it at least every other day. Several reasons. First of all, you don't like drinking dirty water, do you? Well, neither do the birds. And you don't really want to bathe in a dirty bathtub, and neither do the birds. And so, um, the other piece about it is when you change the water out, you reduce the possibility of mosquitoes taking up residence in there. Now, if you have an active bird bath, then the likelihood of mosquitoes establishing is fairly low because they only will lay their eggs in stagnant water. And if you've got lots of birds coming in and ruffling the water up, then that's not a problem. And if you're worried that it might be a problem, you can always drop a mosquito dunk in there and it won't bother the birds. It will bother the mosquitoes. It's a larvicide, but it won't bother the birds.
Erin,
Yes.
there was a question about what's solar charged fountains for bird baths.
So the solar charged fountains can be helpful because they will disturb the water. And the reason you wanted them to disturb the water or to make it ripple is that's what catches the bird's eyes and draws them to the water. So yes, solar fountains, solar charged fountains can definitely be a good thing. It also means that you don't have electricity out there trying to run another kind of a fountain. So yes, they definitely can work for you. However, the one thing that I will say is that there are some birds that would rather take their baths in a sheltered area where there's probably not going to be as much sunshine. And there are other birds that don't mind having the water out in a more exposed area. So it kind of depends on the bird and kind of how big they are, who their predators are. So if maybe you want to have one that's in the shade area and one that's out in the sun area. And I see that Jaya said that my birds go for the dirty water instead of the fresh water. I'm not sure why that is, unless there might be something in the water itself that maybe there's something that's edible for them. That would be a really good thing to investigate, but I actually don't know. But I do know how I can ask Jaya, and I will find out for you. So what else can you do? Well, there are choices that you can make beyond the garden gate. If you have a cat, keep your cat indoors. Indoor cats actually live longer and have healthier lives. Outdoor cats, as much as we like to think of them having their freedom, they actually can kill more birds than any other non-native threat. Um, eh, they're really quick. And sometimes people's solution to that is, well, the cat has to go outside, so I'll put a bell on the cat. That's really not recommended. It's not good for the cat's sensitive ears. So if you can't keep your cat indoors, then at least make them highly visible. And this is what's called a Be Safe collar. Now, you can definitely order one online. The high contrast patterns and colors catch the bird's eye and they alert the birds to kitty's presence in the landscape. But I have also seen photographs where people have just taken the really colorful scrunchies and put the scrunchies around the cat, and apparently that seems to work as well. So instead of belling the cat, you just want to put something around them so that the birds can see that they're hanging out in the yard. The other thing that you can do is skip the sprays in the garden. Often the reason that we want to spray is because we have pests. We have some sort of garden pests that we don't want there. We're not happy about. We want them to go away. They've been bugging us all season. But many of those same pests that we aren't happy about because they're chewing on our plants are food sources for the birds. So if you spray, you may be removing one of the food sources. So you need to skip the spray in the garden. If you have to do it, do some hand picking. That's what we do in the community garden. That's what we do in our demonstration garden at the Environmental Education Center. The other place you can skip the spray is in your garden basket. When you are out shopping, try to find the organic food choices because you then are supporting farmers who don't spray. And you're helping to cut out some of the 1 billion pounds of pesticides that we use each year in the United States. So, just as simple as changing one thing that you buy and buying it as an organic product instead of a conventionally grown product helps the birds. When you are upgrading your yard and you're thinking about a makeover, um, we often think about lighting because we want to be able to go out in our yards in the evenings and be safe. We don't want to trip over things. So, when you're selecting lighting for your yard, whether it is a post like this or it's something that is your porch light, choose the things that shed the light downward, not upward. We have lots of street lights, and they cast, some of them cast their lights downwards, but some of them also spill out into areas where it reflects back up. And migrating birds at night, because birds do move around at night, they can get confused. And that light pollution is a problem. So if you do need something in your yard for safety, choose something that casts the light down and limits the spill of light enough for you to be able to walk around, but not enough to confuse your bird friends. Also at night, often we leave our windows open, our curtains are open, and or rather, our windows are closed, our curtains are open, and our lights are on. And that can confuse the birds, and it can contribute to birds thinking that they can fly straight through, and we get what are like window strikes. So what we ask people to do is lights out, curtains and blinds closed at night. Now, there are windows that look clear to us, but this is what they look like to birds because of the sky reflections. And while you can't replace all of the windows in a building, you can make the windows that you have safer for birds both in the daytime and the nighttime. Just some really simple adjustments that will stop birds from hitting the windows. Things like putting up screens helps birds to not run into the windows. Closing those drapes, covering the outside of the glass with construction paper or something that's easily removable. So last year, one of the things that we did was we showed people how to make a very simple decal with their kits. Now, you can spend money and you can get very professional, pretty looking um, basically they're cling decals that you stick on your window on the inside, and it helps to break up the window so that it's not one clear surface. But this is one that we did with permanent Sharpie markers and a Ziploc baggie. Actually, any kind of clear baggie will do. So we found a pattern, we traced it, we um, cut it up, and as you can see, I didn't do a very good job of cutting on that one. You can also take the pattern and take that same plastic, and you can apply a solution of glue, and then the glue dries. And that's another way that you can create a decal, and then you can color it and make that stick to the window. Anything that's an easily removable decal. Now, I had only put the one up for the pictures, but if you're going to do it, you need to put several, enough that it doesn't look just like a reflected sky. It looks like there's things in there, and it causes the bird to go, wait, maybe I don't want to go shooting all the way through there. That might not be a clear space. You can be a citizen scientist, and we just this a couple of weeks ago just completed one of the biggest citizen science projects, and that is the annual backyard bird count. It's held every year in February, and any citizen can sign up and keep a tally over the weekend. It's usually like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and submit the lists of birds, the number of birds to the site so that scientists can figure out at that time of day and this particular season all across the United States what birds are where and how many are there. And that's part of how they uh, keep track of our populations. I see somebody said, did you see the article in the Sunday Dallas Morning News that Laura Bush had an article on having lights out at night? I had heard about it. I had not seen it yet. And it's especially important, and I'm glad you brought that up. March through May. March through May is migration season. So turning out your lights at night, closing your curtains helps to make it dark and so that the birds aren't distracted or misdirected towards your windows. And then the last thing that you can do is share what you know. I've shared some ideas with you, a number of options that you can adopt into your daily life and into your landscape, but share it with others. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. Spread the word about caring for birds. Buy somebody a cup of coffee that is shade grown, and then tell them why you bought them shade grown coffee, and maybe they'll start doing it as well. Oh, okay. Somebody else just dropped in and said, another citizen science count global big days coming at May 8th. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Jackie. I did not know about that. I will make a note of it because we'll be posting coming in sort of towards the end of April and into May. We'll be doing our All About Birds series again. We actually have several videos that are posted on YouTube. We have them on our Live Green in Plano, and it's all about how to get started with bird watching, how to begin converting your landscape, what you can do to support birds. So if you tune into that and follow us, you'll get some more ideas. Are there any birds that eat mosquitoes? They do, um, but they're mosquitoes really, if I recall correctly, they're not that. They do eat them, but they're not the greatest source of protein for birds. That tends to be things like worms and larvae more than anything else. I'd have to look it up. I do occasionally get that question, and off the top of my head, I can't think of which birds they are. So a couple of resources. I did mention the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, birds.cornell.edu is where we got so much of our information for our series last year and also for this presentation. And also from audubon.org. They have wonderful guides. They even have apps both for Android and iPhone so that you can identify more than 800 species of birds in North America. And you've got it right in your pocket. It'll tell you all you want to know about that bird. And they're for free. So it's a great resource to log into. They have wonderful articles and ideas. One of the ones that I poked around because I had done a lot of research last year, I was looking to see if they had any more information on creating a bird-friendly landscape. Essentially, there was a couple of things that they mentioned, but really the primary ones that I told you today were the same ones that they had last year. But the other thing, though, that Audubon does have is they have plant lists. So you can put in your zip code and you can look up which plants grow in your zip code and support birds. So I love Audubon website. Plus, they have the best pictures, and they have a really cool part of the website that has bird calls. So if you want to learn bird calls, there are apps, some that you pay for, some that you don't, but you can also just go to audubon.org and go listen to their bird calls. They have great recordings that their ornithologists have done. If you're trying to purchase a bird-friendly coffee, then go to Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. They have a migratory bird center, and on that page, they have a listing of where to buy bird-friendly coffee. It explains what the different types of labels are, and it can help you to choose a product that is actually a shade-grown coffee. They do use Bitly, so coffee labels, it actually matters, the capitalization in there. But if you just Google bird-friendly coffee or where do I find bird-friendly coffee, that's actually how I found this when I was researching. And they've got some suggestions for where to buy online, where to find a retailer, and again, how to read the labels so that you are making sure that what you are wanting is actually what you're getting. We did mention several times how important insects are as a dietary staple. So, going to the Xerces Society and looking up for our region what the pollinators are, that will help you to figure out. They tell what the plants are and what the pollinators are that are attracted to those plants, and then you're creating a bird buffet just by attracting them. And don't feel too bad. It's all part of the cycle. There's lots more insects than there are birds. So if the birds eat some, it's fine. They'll be the insect population will be fine, and so will the birds.
Erin,
And
there were a couple. Oh, sorry. There were a
yeah,
couple of questions I thought were related.
okay.
One was about dried worms as food.
I do know that there are people that put them out, and I know that they have. They do have protein in them. I don't know if they're better than or worse than the larva that's there, or even the actual worms. But that would be a great thing to pursue. I can definitely find out. Olivia Osborne is our litter awareness coordinator, and she actually is a birder. And she was the one that I partnered with last year to develop a lot of this stuff because I didn't know diddly doodly about birds other than I could probably identify some of the more common ones, and then I knew about the water, but I didn't know a lot about the insect portion. Collin County. Oh, thank you so much, Jackie. Collin County has a great Audubon chapter. Prairie and Timbers Audubon. Meetings are free. Everybody's welcome, and they're on Zoom right now, so there's no reason not to attend. Thank you, Jackie, for that tip. That is excellent tip. Our Facebook page is facebook.com Live Green in Plano, and we tackle all kinds of things related to sustainable living. But I do know that I'm pretty sure you can search in our videos and you will find all of our bird videos as well as our postings. And like I said, we're going to start those up again in about 5 or 6 weeks, focusing more on birds. I totally appreciate you all sharing some of these resources because now I'll be able to pass it on. Somebody said, I usually soak the dry mealworms and keep it out, but the starlings gobble it up and don't let anyone else near them. Yes, the starlings are kind of the bullies. So are blue jays. I lived in California for a number of years, and scrub jays were like the loudest, meanest birds on the block. But yes, the starlings gobble them up. JM, it may be that you need to place them in a different area. Sometimes birds, like with the bird bath, sometimes they want it at ground level, sometimes they want it higher up, and same way with feeding. So feeding them in an area that's maybe not as accessible to the starlings, when the other birds discover it, especially the smaller birds, they might actually be able to have a place at the table by doing that. So, in order to get a hold of me or to ask me more questions, or for me to put you in touch with Olivia, uh, you can send us an email at SEED, that's Sustainability and Environmental Education Division at plano.com. Our office number is the 4130, and that will be answered by our very lovely, cheerful, and customer service oriented administrative assistant, Renee. And she loves birds and animals, so you can have a lovely chat with her while you're trying to track us down. But we would love to hear from you. We would love to get your bird pictures. We'd love to know what plants you have in your garden and which birds are showing up for those plants. Are there any other questions left, Sabrina?
I'm not seeing any others pop up right now.
Okay, I was kind of scrolling up and down looking and I didn't see anything else. One thing I will remind you is that we do have a beautiful resource in the Plano Public Library. They have lots of lovely bird books. They have books on landscaping for wildlife. I highly recommend looking at those. Um, it's not just the birds that you're attracting. Remember, we talked about insects, but we also have other creatures that are part of that habitat, and planting for the rabbits and planting for all kinds of other nature critters is a great way to increase the diversity or the biodiversity that's in your garden. Someone said, has anyone seen hummingbirds in Plano yet? I believe I heard somebody the other day say that they have had one or two in their backyard, but they also are hummingbird people. I have not seen any yet in our environmental education center, and I will say they show up, but we don't have anything blooming right now. We have yuccas, red yuccas that attract our hummingbirds. We definitely have the Turks Cap. It's not blooming yet. We did have some blossoms that were on our autumn sage, but I was checking it yesterday, blossom free. So the hummingbird friend, I think, is actually putting out hummingbird nectar that she makes up. I'll have to check with her and see. But I think it's still a little bit early for the hummingbirds. If you're a hummingbird aficionado and you know, drop us an answer in the chat. So that's all I've got to share with you today. I hope it's given you some ideas of how you can participate in creating a more bird-friendly landscape and a bird-friendly lifestyle. Uh, we would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to drop us a line. Oh, somebody just said, are hummingbird feeders a good idea? That depends on what your goal is. They are a good idea if you do it properly. If you're changing it out on a regular basis, if you're using the feeder itself that's a color and not trying to color the food, if you're not leaving it out longer than the hummingbirds need it, because some of them migrate, and by you providing a food source at a time when they're supposed to be moving on, you're not being helpful. But there are some hummingbirds, apparently, I don't know if they're this far north, but there are some that are a little bit farther south in Texas that hang around all year long. So it kind of depends on what your goal is. All right, Sabrina, any other comments or questions that I didn't see?
There is a question if there's a Facebook page for reference or posting photos.
Um, n- Not from us, but I would not be surprised if Audubon didn't have a Facebook page that you could post photos to and reference. Um, but that's a really good question. I don't actually know.
And then Jackie had a resource saying journeynorth.org tracks hummingbird migration in real time.
Excellent. Yes, and Journey North also, if I recall correctly, tracks monarch butterflies as well. So that is a great resource. I will definitely add that to the resources that we mentioned. I just saw something that pops up. What about birdhouses, or is it best to let them do it with nature? That depends on the bird. I will tell you one of the things that I am super proud about as uh, someone who is part of the Plano community. Our Parks and Recreation Division has been part of a bluebird restoration project for several years, and they have put out bluebird boxes because the bluebird habitat has disappeared. Bluebird boxes, you have to take care of them. They're built in a particular way. They have to be mounted at a particular height. You do have to monitor them because they can get insects, ants, things like that that can in there and bother the young. But bird houses can indeed be one way that you help them. But the thing that we often do with birdhouses is for our own convenience is that we'll hang them on tree branches and we will nail them to trees. And what we don't think about is then, yes, we've provided a place for the birds to be sheltered, but we've also provided an access point for predators that may try to eat the eggs or to get at the young birds. And so often it is better for us to mount them on poles and then make baffles at the bottom that keep the predators from being able to come up. So yes, birdhouses can be helpful. Uh, they can be helpful for specific species, but they need to be mounted in the proper way, at the proper height, so that the birds benefit from it, but we're not exposing them to problems with predators. How to keep wasps from occupying birdhouses? Check it regularly. That's the only thing I know of. We have them, wasp nests show up regularly in an area where our mourning doves love to nest. Fortunately, they're fairly far apart and they don't seem to be bothering the mourning doves. But the anything that's enclosed, you have to check it on a regular basis. It does not take very long for the wasps to set up household. So it looks like we're almost at time. Was there anything that you wanted to add, Sabrina, before we sign off?
All right. I just put a reminder in the chat for the email that they can send with questions at seed@plano.gov, as well as checking out planolibrary.org for more information on the different activities that we're going to be doing. The library was doing, I believe we started this just last week, as far as I'm aware, or maybe early this week, where we had an activity for kids that was centered around learning more about birds, if that was something that
Cool.
anyone was interested in.
Yes, that I'm interested in, and I'm just a big kid at heart, so I would love to know what the activity is. That is a great idea. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that you will come back to another library Zoominar soon.